All right, welcome to another deep dive with, well, with me and with you, of course, and with our expert. Today we're diving deep into Nero Buono, and I'm sure that might sound familiar to some of you, but honestly, I had never even heard of this grape until we started prepping for this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly a household name like, Cabernet Sauvignon or Pinot Noir, but for those who are into Italian wines especially, it's certainly a name that's starting to get some buzz, some attention.
That's what it seemed like from all this materials from the Lazio region of Italy, right?
Yeah.
And there was a whole bunch on Cori
E-
specifically.
Exactly. That's where it really shines, the
Yeah.
Cori area in the Lazio region, southeast of Rome. That's where you find some of the most expressive examples of Nero Buono.
I think one of the things that really jumped out to me going through all of this was how it almost completely vanished at one point. Like it practically disappeared, and then there was this whole rediscovery thing.
Oh, absolutely. It was a very close call for Nero Buono. A lot of factors played a role in its decline during the 20th century: changing trends in agriculture, the preference for more internationally known varieties, economic pressures, you name it. There were just a handful of dedicated growers who kept it alive, really.
So it was like this hidden gem just waiting to be unearthed again, and luckily, some people saw its potential and brought it back.
Yeah. And the research that went into understanding its unique characteristics and historical significance, that was huge too. It helped give Nero Buono a real identity and a solid foundation for its comeback.
Well, that's a story in itself.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about that whole rediscovery process later on. But before we go too far, let's just give our listener a quick overview. What exactly is Nero Buono and what makes it special? What makes it worth diving into?
Okay. Well, to start, it's a red grape variety native to the Lazio region, as we said, and it's known for producing wines that are, well, they're quite elegant, I'd say. They've got this beautiful ruby color, often with these violet hues, especially in the younger wines. And when you taste them, they've got a lovely freshness, a nice acidity, and these really well integrated tannins. They're not harsh at all.
Tannins are that's what gives red wine that sort of dryness or astringency, right?
Right, exactly. It's that feeling on your tongue, that sort of grippy sensation. But in Nero Buono, the tannins are generally pretty soft, not overpowering at all.
Okay, good to know. So it's refreshing, it's not too tannic. What about the aromas? What should people expect to smell when they're swirling their glass of Nero Buono?
Oh, the aromatics are really interesting. You get a lot of those classic red fruit notes like cherry and raspberry, but then you also get some darker fruits coming through like blackberry and plum. And there's often this really nice floral note too, sort of like violets. And to add a bit of complexity, you often get these subtle hints of spice, maybe a little bit of black pepper.
So it's kind of like a multi-layered thing, like it evolves as you're experiencing it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's got the potential to develop even further with age, too. It can make these really nice structured wines that can age for a while, developing those more complex aromas and flavors. But you can also find some really enjoyable, easy drinking styles that are meant to be enjoyed young.
So it's versatile too. All right, let's jump back to the history then. We know it almost disappeared, but before that, what do we know about its origins?
Well, the precise origins are still a bit of a mystery. There's some speculation that it might be linked to ancient Roman grape varieties, and that wouldn't be surprising considering Corey's long winemaking tradition. But there's no hard evidence to back that up at this point. It's possible there just isn't any documentation left.
It's kind of lost to time then. But we know it was a major player in the region at some point.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like it was a highly regarded grape. I mean, even the name Nero Buono itself is kind of a clue, right? It literally translates to good black. So clearly people recognized its quality.
That's a pretty straightforward endorsement. And that makes it even more intriguing, how it went from being this good black grape to almost disappearing entirely. What were some of the factors that contributed to its decline?
Well, as we said, a lot of it had to do with economics. In the mid 20th century, there was a real push for higher yields and for wines that were, more commercially viable.
So grapes that were easier to grow, easier to sell.
Exactly. And Nero Buono, it's not the easiest grape to work with. It can be a bit finicky in the vineyard, and it doesn't always produce huge yields.
So it kind of fell out of favor. Like
Yeah.
people just stopped planting it as much.
That's right. And as a result, it almost vanished completely. But luckily, there were some folks who held on to those old vines, who recognized that there was something special about this grape.
And then eventually it got rediscovered, as we were saying. This is where things get really interesting. You mentioned some research earlier. What was that all about?
So in recent decades, there's been this growing interest in, in preserving Italy's wine heritage, in reviving these forgotten varieties, and that includes Nero Buono. So researchers started doing these ampelographic studies, which is basically like grapevine detective work.
Grapevine detective work. That's a new one. Okay, so explain that to me. What kind of detective work are we talking about?
It's all about identifying and classifying grape varieties. So they'll look at the shape of the leaves, the size and color of the berries, the structure of the grape bunches, all those little
So
details.
it's like, are you sure this is Nero Buono, or is this some other grape that looks similar?
Exactly. And they also do genetic analysis, which helps to confirm the grape's identity and trace its lineage.
So science comes to the rescue.
Mhm.
And who are some of the key players in this whole rediscovery process? Who really championed Nero Buono and brought it back?
Well, there were a number of people who were instrumental, but one name that stands out is Azienda Agricola Cincinnato. They were really pioneers in studying and replanting Nero Buono. They did a lot of work with clonal selection too, trying to identify those vines that produce the highest quality grapes. And they really paved the way for other producers to follow suit.
Clonal selection, that's where you take cuttings from the best vines and use those to plant new vineyards, right?
Right, exactly. It's a way to ensure that you're propagating the most desirable characteristics, the vines that produce the best fruit, the most balanced wine.
Okay, so we've got the science, we've got the dedicated producers, and then at some point, the DOC Corey comes into the picture. What was the significance of that?
Oh, that was huge. The establishment of the DOC Corey in 2010, that was a real turning point for Nero Buono. It gave it official recognition. It basically said, hey, this is a quality wine. It comes from a specific place, and it deserves to be protected.
So it's like an official designation of origin and quality control.
Exactly. And it sets out, specific rules about the grape varieties that can be used, the maximum yields allowed, the winemaking methods that are permitted. It's all about maintaining the integrity of the wine, making sure that it reflects the terroir of Corey.
Okay, so it's good for the producers, it's good for consumers, everyone wins. So now that we've covered the history, let's talk about where Nero Buono is grown. We've mentioned Corey a lot, but what is it about the terroir of this particular area that makes it so ideal for this grape?
Well, Corey has this really unique combination of factors that come together to create something special. First of all, you've got the climate. It's a classic Mediterranean climate. So you've got these warm, dry summers and these mild, wet winters, and that's perfect for ripening those Nero Buono grapes.
So plenty of sunshine, but not too extreme.
Exactly. And then there's the influence of the Tyrrhenian Sea, which is just a few kilometers away. The sea breezes help to moderate those summer temperatures, and they create this kind of natural ventilation in the vineyards, which is important for keeping the grapes healthy.
So like a built-in air conditioner.
Yeah.
And we can't forget the soil, can we? What kind of soils are we dealing with in Corey?
Yeah, the soil is crucial. And in Corey, you've got this really interesting mix. There's a lot of volcanic soil, which is rich in minerals like potassium and phosphorus. And those minerals, they can really contribute to the complexity and the minerality of the wines.
I'm hearing that word minerality a lot. What does that actually mean in terms of how the wine tastes?
It's kind of hard to describe, but it's like this sort of saline, stony quality. It adds a dimension to the wine, like a sort of savory edge.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it. So volcanic soils and what else?
You've also got these clay soils, which are great for water retention, and that's important in a region with hot, dry summers because it helps the vines to stay hydrated. And then there's limestone too, which contributes to the structure and the elegance of the tannins in the wines.
So it's like this perfect storm of favorable conditions, climate, sea breezes, and a mix of soil types that all work together.
Yeah, it really is. And it's that unique combination that gives Nero Buono from Corey its own distinctive personality.
Okay, so we know the terroir is fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about the vine itself. What are some of the defining characteristics of the Nero Buono grapevine?
Well, it's a fairly vigorous vine, and it tends to produce these medium-sized bunches of grapes. The leaves they're usually five-lobed, and they have this kind of heart shape. And the berries themselves are small to medium-sized, and they have this really intense blue-black color when they're ripe.
Blue-black, huh? That explains the Nero part of the name.
Yeah, Nero means black in Italian. And as for the Buono part, well, that's something we've already talked about.
The good black grape. All right, so we've got our blue-black grapes. What's the typical growing season like for Nero Buono? When are the grapes harvested?
Bud break usually happens sometime in April, and then flowering is usually around May or June. Veraison, which is when the grapes start to change color, that's usually in August, and then harvest typically happens in late September or early October.
That's a pretty standard timeline for a red grape.
Yeah, pretty much. But of course, the exact timing can vary depending on the specific vintage, the weather conditions and all that.
And I'm sure the growers have to be really careful with things like yields and canopy management to make sure that they're getting the best quality grapes.
No, absolutely. Yield management is crucial, and it starts with winter pruning. That's where you determine how many buds you're going to leave on each vine, which directly affects how much fruit the vine will produce. And then during the growing season, you might do some green harvesting too, which is where you remove some of the grape bunches to concentrate the flavors in the remaining ones.
So it's all about quality over quantity. And what about canopy management? What's involved in that?
That's about managing the foliage, the leaves of the vine. You want to make sure that the grapes are getting enough sunlight, so you might have to do some leaf removal. But you also want to protect the grapes from too much sun exposure, especially in those really hot summer months. So it's all about finding the right balance, making sure that the grapes are getting the optimal amount of sunlight and air circulation.
So it's not just about planting the vines and letting them do their thing, is it? There's a lot of work that goes into managing the vineyard throughout the year.
Oh, yeah. It's a year-round job for sure. And it's not without its challenges either. There's always the risk of frost damage in the spring, and then there are fungal diseases to worry about too, especially during those humid summer months.
So the growers have to be pretty vigilant, always keeping an eye on their vines.
Yeah, they really do. And then there's the whole issue of climate change too, which is adding another layer of complexity to viticulture everywhere.
It's a lot to juggle. All right, let's move on to the winemaking process itself. We've talked about how the grapes are grown, so how are those beautiful blue-black berries transformed into a delicious bottle of Nero Buono?
Okay, well, the first step after the grapes are harvested is crushing, and that's basically just breaking the berries open to release the juice. And then the must, which is the combination of the juice, the skins, and the seeds, it goes into a fermentation vessel.
And what are some of the common fermentation vessels used for Nero Buono?
Well, it really depends on the style of wine the winemaker is going for. For those lighter, fresher styles, they might use stainless steel tanks, which are, they're neutral. They don't impart any additional flavors to the wine. But for those more complex, age-worthy wines, they might use oak barrels.
Oak barrels add like vanilla and spice notes, right? And they also allow for some oxygen to get into the wine, which can help with aging.
Right, exactly. And the type of oak can make a big difference too. You've got French oak, American oak, and even some Italian oak is being used now. And the age of the barrels matters too. Newer barrels tend to impart more of those oaky flavors, while older barrels are more subtle.
So it's like another layer of complexity.
Yeah,
And during fermentation, the yeast is converting the sugar in the grape juice into alcohol, right?
that's it. And it's also producing a whole bunch of other compounds that contribute to the aroma and the flavor of the wine.
And once fermentation is complete, what happens next?
Well, the wine might undergo malolactic fermentation, which is a secondary fermentation that converts malic acid into lactic acid, and that can help to soften the acidity of the wine and make it, a bit more round and buttery.
Okay. And after that?
Then the wine is typically aged, and again, the aging process can vary depending on the style of wine. Some wines might be bottled and released fairly quickly, while others might be aged for months or even years in oak barrels or in large wooden vats.
And the aging process helps to further develop the aromas and flavors, right? And they can also soften the tannins and make the wine more approachable.
Exactly. And then finally, when the winemaker decides it's ready, it's bottled and sent out into the world.
That's the fun part, the tasting. And I know we talked about this a bit earlier, but can you remind us what kind of flavors and aromas are typical of Nero Buono?
Sure. As we said, you get a lot of those red and black fruit notes like cherry, raspberry, blackberry, plum. And then there are often those floral notes like violet and those hints of spice like black pepper. And then as the wine ages, you might start to get some more savory notes like leather and tobacco and maybe even some earthy or balsamic notes.
It's like a journey for the senses, right? It changes and evolves over time.
It really is. And the great thing about Nero Buono is that it can be enjoyed in so many different ways. You can have it young and fresh, or you can cellar it and let it develop those more complex flavors. It's a very versatile wine.
And I know you mentioned some specific food pairings earlier. What are some of the dishes that you think really sing with Nero Buono?
Well, as a general rule, Nero Buono pairs really well with dishes that have some richness and depth of flavor. It can handle some spice too. So things like grilled meats, roasted vegetables, pasta dishes with hearty sauces, those all work really well.
And what about cheese? Any particular cheese pairings that stand out?
Yeah, Nero Buono goes great with cheese. It's got enough acidity to cut through the richness of cheese, and the tannins can stand up to those more aged, complex cheeses. So Pecorino Romano, for example, that's a classic pairing. But you could also try it with aged cheddar, Gouda, even some blue cheeses.
So lots of options for pairing. It sounds like it's a wine that could be enjoyed with a wide range of cuisines.
It really is, and that's one of the things that makes it so appealing, I think.
Okay, so we know where it comes from, we know how it's made, we know what it tastes like, and we know what to eat with it.
Mm.
But where can people actually find a bottle of Nero Buono? How easy is it to get hold of?
Well, it's definitely becoming more widely available, but it's still relatively niche. You're more likely to find it in specialty wine shops or online, and it's definitely worth seeking out if you can.
And do you have any advice for people who are trying to find a good bottle of Nero Buono? What should they be looking for?
Well, the DOC Cori designation is always a good sign, as we discussed earlier. That means that the wine has met certain quality standards and that it's authentically from the Cori region. And then in terms of producers, there are some names that I would definitely recommend, like Marco Carpenetti, Cincinnato, Tenuta della Corte, Antonello Loretti. Those are all producers who are making really high quality Nero Buono.
So a little bit of research can go a long way. And it sounds like this is a grape with a bright future. What are some of the things that you think are contributing to the growing interest in Nero Buono?
Well, I think there's a few factors at play. There's definitely a trend towards discovering and appreciating those lesser known grape varieties, those wines that are a little bit off the beaten path. And Nero Buono certainly fits that bill. It's got a great story, it's got a unique character, and it comes from this beautiful historic region.
Yeah.
And then there's also the fact that that Nero Buono tends to be a very food-friendly wine. It's got that balance of acidity and tannins that we were talking about earlier, so it can pair really well with a wide range of dishes. And I think that makes it really appealing to a lot of people.
So it's got the story, it's got the flavor, and it's got the versatility. Sounds like a winning combination to me.
I think so too.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into the world of Nero Buono. I have to say, I knew very little about it before we started this conversation, but I'm definitely intrigued now. It's a grape with a rich history, a unique personality, and a bright future ahead of it. And I encourage everyone listening to seek out a bottle and experience it for themselves. You might just discover your new favorite Italian red.
Absolutely. And I'll just add that it's a great reminder that there's so much more to the world of wine than just those big name international varieties. There are all these hidden gems out there just waiting to be discovered. And Nero Buono is a perfect example of that.
Well said. So until next time, cheers to exploring the world of wine, one deep dive at a time.